Hey guys, it's Cece, and welcome to another Harry Potter reading vlog! So in this video, I am going to be reading Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. I am rereading the books. If you didn't watch my first video, you should go watch that, because I'm probably going to be referring to it, so you'll want to be in the know. Basically, I am rereading the Harry Potter series this July, and I am recording all of my many thoughts and feelings as I go along. I am bringing all of you along with me, and this is the second video in the series talking about Chamber of Secrets, which I'm gonna be honest with you is my least favorite book in the series. There's just a lot in this book that isn't as compelling to me, in that most of the things that Harry is dealing with are just sort of annoyances, and those frustrate me because, like, if an enemy is like Draco, who's a bully, that's fine. If the enemy is little squabbles and, you know, Quidditch matches, that's great. The problem is the stuff that happens in this book. The people who are around Harry are just annoyances more than anything else. Like, I don't really like Dobby in this book, at least initially. I don't really like Colin Creevey because I think he's just sort of annoying. It's just a lot of people making Harry's year unnecessarily annoying, and that's not as compelling to me. Plus, I hate giant spiders. I hate spiders in general. I can't handle house spiders. I make someone else kill them. I won't even look at them. I won't look at a screen when there's a spider on the screen, so like, this is also missing that. But this is still another year at Hogwarts. It's still a book I love. It's just my least favorite one of the series, so I hope you're ready to hear my many Chamber of Secrets thoughts. Okay, thought number one, I talk about this like all the time because it's my absolute favorite thing. When Harry meets Dobby, Dobby says that, Dobby has heard of your greatness, sir, and I know that this is probably explained by the fact that, like, there are people in the Malfoy's house talking about Harry and his history, but in my mind, there is no one in that house who could possibly be conveying specific information other than Draco Malfoy. And considering how much of the books we get later on with Harry obsessing over Draco's every step and thought, I just like to think that Draco's doing literally the exact same thing from when he was 11 years old. And he just wanders around his house complaining about how great Harry Potter is and talking about him all the time. And that's why Dobby knows who Harry Potter is and knows anything about him. It's because Draco can't keep it in his pants. It's because Draco has a crush, and it's a evil, annoying crush, and he doesn't like it. And that's that. That is the only thing I will accept at this point. So, Chamber of Secrets is when we start expanding our character list significantly. Like, the first book you are introduced to all the main essential players, pretty much. And with each book, the world gets bigger, you get more characters, but I think a lot more important characters get introduced in Chamber of Secrets, like outside of the original main cast. You know, for example, Ginny and Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, we knew they existed before, and maybe they had a couple of lines, but we don't really know anything about them, and Chamber is the first time that we are introduced to those characters more fully. We get a better idea of who they are and who they will be as the series goes on, and I think that there are a few more characters that that applies to as well. Just in general, you are getting to know characters more, but Chamber is an important book for expanding beyond that. Like Lucius Malfoy, getting more about Draco, but then by extension Dobby, who's very important. I just think that that's the bulk of what this book is doing. It's also about getting to know Hagrid more, getting to know Hogwarts more. Obviously that's every book, but you know, like I said, this is my least favorite book, so I try to find the ways in which it is succeeding as a book and the things that this book is specifically trying to do. So, thoughts about the Burrow, because Harry just barely arrived at the Burrow for the first time, and that is always a scene and a bit that makes me very emotional and very happy because the Burrow is one of my favorite fictional places ever. It is my second favorite Harry Potter location, obviously the first being Hogwarts. The Burrow is homey and lived in and full of love, which is what makes it really special and what makes it really significant to Harry. It's the second place where he feels like he has people who care about him. So I love it for that. I love the way that Harry interacts with the burrow. I also like the things that Harry says about the burrow when, you know, Ron is feeling really self-conscious and really nervous about sharing the space with someone else. Just very lovely and nice. I will say that this book, again, gets into the bit where I'm like, why did no adult in Harry's life do literally anything? Where I respect Molly for, like, constantly telling Harry that she doesn't blame him at all for the flying car incident. Like, she, even as she is yelling at everybody else, she makes multiple points to stop and say, obviously I don't blame you, Harry. We're happy to have you here. And I appreciate that the book even says that her and Arthur were worried, and if another week had gone on, they would have gone to pick Harry up. Like, I appreciate that there was some kind of proactive plan for eventually. I don't really appreciate the fact that Fred and George specifically tell Molly, hey, they were starving him. They were starving him. And Molly is, like, immediately softer on them, and she gives Harry extra food. But, like, he still goes back there. You know, as an adult, and I know that adults can't always do anything about that, but I feel like I would make a greater step. I would speak to other people about getting that changed, because for someone who is as loving and lovely as Molly, it just frustrates me like it frustrates me with every hero, or not every hero, every adult in this series, that no one does anything to improve Harry's living situation, which is terrible because they are starving him and keeping him locked up like a prisoner. I always forget how accurate, like, the memes and jokes are about Draco telling his father things until I reread this book. When he's going on and on about how Harry's so special. He's famous for having a stupid scar and everyone thinks he's smart, and then he's wonderful with his broomstick and his scar again. Lucius, you have told me this at least a dozen times already, Malfoy. It's just a hysterical level of obsession that it's so memeable, and I'm glad that it's become the meme that it has, and I'm glad that we have the bit in Prisoner of Azkaban where Draco's like, you wait till my father hears about this, and, like, I know that that's his thing, and I know that that's even more his thing in the Star Kid musicals, but it's hysterical how much Draco talks about Harry. It's legitimately hysterical to me, because it's such blatant, like, crush behavior that it's laughable. Yes, it is July, and yet I am wearing a sweatshirt. It is always very cold in our apartment because there's something wrong with what senses what temperature it is. So at night, it's really hot. During the day, it's freezing cold. There's no fixing it. But I am wearing a Ravenclaw sweatshirt, so it's still on brand. Anyway, there's a thing that happens in Chamber of Secrets that feels like is a question we never really get an answer to, in that we know all the different, like, rates for galleons, sickles, and nuts. It's nonsense. It's a completely nonsensical system, especially in a society where wizards, math starts being an elective very early on in their schooling career, so you'd think that they would want a slightly more straightforward conversion rate between the different types of money. But in Chamber of Secrets, there's a bit where you see Hermione's parents, and Arthur is fascinated because they are exchanging Muggle money for wizard money. What the fuck is the conversion rate between, like, a pound and a galleon? Do we know? Is a galleon worth the same amount as, like, that size gold piece would be in Muggle money? I don't know. I'm just like, this is a pointless question, ultimately, but I am very fascinated to understand how Muggle economy would impact wizarding economy, and how that conversion rate would shift over time. What is with the economy of these two worlds and how they overlap? I can't believe that they're exchanging Muggle money for wizarding money. What does it mean? I don't have enough information. What? How? I have a couple of thoughts to share. First of all, I want to talk about one of my favorite, like, I don't want to say plot threads, but, like, character threads, a thing that tends to be true, which is that, Ron, generally speaking, always happens upon the truth. He always happens to know what the truth is. Just sometimes he says it wildly, sometimes he says the least likely thing, but generally speaking, what he says does happen. And one of the first instances of this is in Chamber of Secrets early on. Hermione's going on about how great Gilderoy Lockhart is and all of the amazing things that he's done. And Ron says, yeah, he says he's done. Which is a little thing that he knows. He knows Gilderoy's a fake, so that's perfect. It's just a fun thing to follow. Like, follow along with what Ron says and check how often it comes true. One of the other things is that, like, an annoyance that I have with the system at Hogwarts is that brooms make a significant difference in a Quidditch game. Having the right broom drastically affects the type of game you're going to have. So it feels like maybe there should be some sort of regulation happening with the brooms, but instead, people can just buy the best, newest broom and have a significant advantage. It just seems like a questionable policy that you can somewhat determine the outcome of a Quidditch game just by having more money than everyone else. You know, it just feels like maybe they should have a contingency for that. Because it's kind of bullshit. It's not even kind of, it's very bullshit. So yeah, those are my thoughts right now. This book is always an adventure. It's always an adventure of Colin being annoying and Lockhart being annoying and Dobby being annoying, and this is it's just such an interesting one. Chamber of Secrets. I've just gotten to my favorite little known fact about the Harry Potter series. So, I'm at the scene where Nearly Headless Nick is inviting Harry to his Death Day party, but there are some very specific circumstances that led to him being invited to this Death Day party. So Harry was talking to Nearly Headless Nick, he gets caught by Filch, he goes into Filch's office, and then Peeves drops a cabinet outside of Filch's office to distract him. When Filch comes back, he says the line, "That vanishing cabinet was extremely valuable." So, the cabinet that Peeves dropped on Nearly Headless Nick's request was the vanishing cabinet, which means that that is why it's not working properly in Half-Blood Prince. So, the reason that it took the entirety of Half-Blood Prince for Draco to get the vanishing cabinet working is because Nearly Headless Nick wanted to invite Harry to his Death Day party, and he convinced Peeves to drop it. That is one of my favorite little known things about the series. Maybe you did already know that, maybe that's a well-known thing, but it took me ages to work that out, and I think it's absolutely hysterical and wonderful in every conceivable way, and it's one of my favorite examples of little plot threads working through earlier books that make significant appearances in later books. I just think that that's an overall really cool, random connection between those stories. So yeah, I enjoyed that quite a bit. I feel like this is going to be a shorter vlog than the first book because I'm about halfway through. A little under halfway through, and I feel like I haven't had nearly as much to say. So who knows? Who knows how interesting this vlog will be as compared to the first one. But now, if you didn't know that little fun fact, you do. And you can use it at parties or on a first date, as long as it's the first date with a person who is impressed by Harry Potter specific knowledge. This is such a fucking pointless update, okay. I always find it interesting that, like, for a long time we characterized Hermione as the one who was, like, very set on the rules, and some people still characterize her that way, and I find that fascinating and baffling, because as soon as Hermione breaks one school rule, she becomes the person who is always suggesting that they break every school rule, and in this book, she's the one who's like, well, we'll just have to make Polyjuice Potion. And when she tells Harry and Ron what they'll need, and they're like, we're gonna have to steal that stuff. You wanna steal? And Hermione's like, what? Are you two chickens? You're not even willing to break one little rule? Like, she's the one who suggests all the rule breaking. She's the one who makes fun of them when they don't want to break rules. She is ruthless, and she maintains that ruthlessness throughout the books. So it's absolutely absurd when people characterize Hermione as this very strict, rule-keeping person, because she doesn't do that except in the first half of the first book. It's, you understand, don't you? You understand how foolish that is? To think Hermione is the one who's a goody two-shoes, when really it's probably Ron. I know we get to this later and Hermione makes a stink, but it really is, like, deeply fucked up. The Wizarding Society, like, the house elves in general, it's a really fucked up system. And what makes it truly upsetting is that you're sort of presented with Dobby in this book, and he says that house elves are enslaved, which is a loaded term. That is a loaded word. Sorry, Leia was leaving me alone until I opened up this camera. She's so fucking annoying. I love her very, very much. She is my sweet and my love, but good God, does she need attention. But yeah, Dobby uses the word enslaved twice in the space of one scene, which is absurd. And the fact that Hermione is the only one, oh my God. The fact that Hermione is the only one who eventually sees a problem with this is ridiculous. Like, the amount of oppression that exists in the wizarding world that we just don't acknowledge or talk about and that they don't think is odd is really fucking upsetting. It's really fucked up. There's an entire magical race, like, and this is just the house elves, that are servants to the wizarding community, and they are indebted to them and will harm themselves if they do not complete tasks that are up to par with their master's requests. It's like, it's on the nose, but it's done in a way that's not handled well at all, and it's not like an interesting look at oppression, or look at how oppression exists in the wizarding community, because no one thinks that it's messed up except for Hermione, and everyone else makes fun of Hermione for finding issues with it. And I find it so interesting that so many people use Harry Potter as a way of understanding oppression and people who are evil, when, like, that shit is never solved. Harry frees Dobby, and there are still so many other house elves who do not get any effort ever. It's just one of the through lines that I think I mean, should not have stood the test of time. It should not have existed in the 90s or the early 2000s, but clearly hasn't stood the test of time to today, when it just gets even more messed up the more years that go on. It really frustrates me, Dobby and the house elves and everything about that, because it's not handled well in the least. The thing that these early books always make me think of the most is, you know, especially early on, it still happens later, but especially early on, Harry, Ron, and Hermione always think that the person behind everything is Malfoy or Snape. Those are the only two they ever accuse, and then generally speaking, it turns out to not be them, and then on the one occasion that it is them, it's Half-Blood Prince. And by that point, Ron and Hermione have stopped accusing Snape and Malfoy of everything. Well, Ron still blames a lot of stuff on Snape and Malfoy, but he does not agree with Harry that Draco is working with Voldemort. So anyway, but in these early books, anything that ever happens, it's always Malfoy and or Snape. And it always makes me think of a pup named Scooby-Doo, when something absolutely ridiculous would be happening, and then Freddy would go, "You know who I think it is? Red herring!" And everyone would be like, "Freddy, it's not red herring. That's absolutely ridiculous. It's clearly someone else." Freddy would be stuck on that idea, and it happened every single episode. That is what these early books make me think of.
The answer to this mystery is obvious. Your bike was stolen by that no-good neighborhood bully and thief, Malfoy.
Oh, I've also, someone asked to talk about, in my TBR that I uploaded, someone asked to talk about how, like, Alan Rickman's performance of Snape, has maybe altered how pop culture thinks of Snape as a character, and so I've been paying attention to a lot of the ways that Snape's actions or described emotions differ in the book versus the movies. And there have been a couple so far, like, for example, in the movie, the first time Harry happens upon Mrs. Norris, Snape says, you know, this is possibly a case of Harry being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And in the book, he sort of says that, and then he still goes off on a tirade blaming Harry and explaining how it possibly could have been him. And then later on, when Harry speaks Parseltongue for the first time, Snape is looking at Harry, and it says it was, in an unexpected way, it was a shrewd and calculating look. And I would say that in the film, in Chamber of Secrets, it's more a look of concern. Not necessarily concern for his well-being, but it is a look that a lot of people attribute to Alan Rickman acting like what could be going wrong with Lily's child, and like, I don't know, it's, in my opinion, it's a very different look. Maybe I'll put up a gif of what Alan Rickman looks like in the movie.
Ivanaska.
But in the book, for it to be shrewd and calculating, it's not even remotely connected to concern. It is about figuring out how to apply this new knowledge to his understanding of Harry, and probably how to continue to blame him for things, because he's a bitter 30-something who wants to blame everything in his life on small children, and continues to do that to his death. So, like, I don't know. Those are just a couple of the Snape things that I've noticed as I've been reading. There are definitely more. I definitely think that the movies make Snape out to be a much better person than the books make him out to be, and that is in large part due to Alan Rickman and his performance of Snape, but it is also due to how that character is written differently in the movies versus in the books, because in the books, he does a lot of really terrible, unforgivable, horrific things, and then at the very end we get like the late stage twist. And in the movies he doesn't do nearly as many of those terrible things, and so a lot more people are willing to forgive him because they don't know the full extent, or they don't remember the full extent of how Snape has treated children for his entire character arc. Like, openly making fun of students like Hermione to the point that she permanently altered the way she looked. She shrinks her two front teeth because Snape joins in with a group of children in bullying a student. So like, that happens. That's pretty fucked up. Snape finds the letter from Lily to, I want to say to Sirius, and he takes only the part of the letter that mentions Lily's name, that says "Love Lily," and he takes part of a picture that belongs to Harry because he's entitled, and that doesn't really happen in the movies. They're just, like, I'll obviously talk about these things more as we get to them, but there are very specific things that Snape does in the books that make him, to me, a much less redeemable character than if you take the movie depiction of his character on its own. This was possibly a very long update, but those are my Snape thoughts at the moment. Where am I at? Harry, Ron, and Hermione are about to take the Polyjuice Potion to see if Malfoy is the heir of Slytherin, to see if Red Herring really is the culprit this time. And we just got our first look at Dumbledore's office. There's so much that happens in this book that's essential to later books. Just stuff that I've been circling, like, the first time we hear the curse Expelliarmus appears in this book, and in my personal opinion, so Snape is the one who performs Expelliarmus at Lockhart during the duel, and it is, in my opinion, at that moment that Harry decided that was going to be his favorite spell, because he saw a spell knock Gilderoy Lockhart on his ass, and he was like, that's it, that's the one for me. But Dumbledore's office is a big thing. We get our first mentions of big spells that are relevant later on, like apparating and like squibs and characters that are going to be relevant. Seeing Dumbledore's office for the first time is a big deal because that becomes a really central location as the series goes on. We get more important Hogwarts professors. Just in general, I appreciate this book for all of that. I've been circling all the stuff that becomes really relevant later in my book so that I can always remember, like, hey, here's the first time this appeared. And I think that that is going to make the books fun for me to reread later on, but it does mean that eventually, when I have a child, I will have to get a different edition of the books for them to read. Which isn't, like, impossible. I'll just, like, read the illustrated editions or get new editions because I like many editions of Harry Potter. Okay, this update has to be over. Okay, back to reading. Another instance of Ron always being right, always, they are theorizing who T. Riddle could have been, and Ron says, they're theorizing who he could have been and why he would have gotten an award for special services to the school, and Ron says, could have been anything. Maybe he got 30 owls, or saved a teacher from the giant squid. Maybe he murdered Myrtle. That would have done everyone a favor. Ron always guesses everything right, even when he's saying the most nonsensical solution to the entire book, because he intuitively knows what's going on. Okay, let's wrap up my thoughts and feelings about Chamber of Secrets, because I finished reading it. So I made notes. I've been making notes anyway, but we're gonna follow my notes for some of my thoughts about the last like 70 or so pages of the book. I don't know if I mentioned this in my first vlog, but one of the things that's really noticeable the more that you read the series and the more time that goes on is like how intense the fat phobia is. And like one of the hallmarks of that is obviously the Dursleys, and I probably talked about it in my first video, but if I didn't, it's very apparent the fat phobia with the Dursleys and how often Dudley and Vernon are described as animals in connection with their weight, but this is also something that happens a lot with Crabbe and Goyle. Their weight is constantly described in connection with how dumb they are, or like generally connecting their body image with what makes them terrible, and that's super shitty. And that definitely does happen with when they're trying to like grab Crabbe and Goyle to get hair for the polyjuice potion. The thing that's their downfall is that they never stop eating, and so it's easy to take advantage of that, which isn't great. So looking for stuff like that is easier and easier the more time that goes on, because J.K. Rowling's fat phobia kind of carries through to everything that she does. She doesn't really like fat people. It's not just in the Harry Potter series, it's also present in her other books. It's just a really gross thing. I also appreciate the bits of this book, like I said, that kind of foreshadow other things. Like, obviously we find out Tom Riddle's real identity is Voldemort in this book, which is clearly very important, but like this is also the first time that we destroy a Horcrux, which is a big deal. I was actually noticing this time when I was reading through the bit where Harry first falls into the diary that it seems a bit like a pensieve, and I wonder if some of the original magic of the diary was like pensieve in nature, and then just when you connect it with a Horcrux, that's what makes it kind of extra messed up. But just like the way that Harry is looking into a memory and then he falls into it is a very similar description to the way that Harry first falls into a pensieve and sees a memory. So I'm curious, that might be something that a lot of people have already noticed, but I just noticed it this time. Underrated thing that happens in this book is definitely all of the professors openly hating Lockhart. I think that it's good. I don't know if I want to say foreshadowing, but it's a good way to indicate how professors act if another professor is endangering one of the students, or if another professor is really stupid, that they'll turn against that professor as a united force. Like, the one thing that brings them together is an idiotic other person that they work with. And as a person who's had jobs, idiotic coworkers bringing other coworkers together is a damn mood. And I just think that it really does foreshadow in some ways exactly how they are all going to react when Umbridge shows up in a few years. I think one of the last things I wanted to talk about was Dumbledore and loyalty. I don't have as much to say on it right now because we only have like this book in connection with Dumbledore and his feelings on loyalty, but like I think something that becomes more apparent later on is that to Dumbledore, loyalty means believing in him without questioning him, which is kind of a messed up idea of loyalty. In this book, we don't get that as much. It's just, you know, about if you're loyal to Dumbledore, then let me find the line. So Dumbledore says, "You will find that I will only truly have left the school when none here are loyal to me," which is like a positive thing to remark on. Like, Dumbledore's protection will always be there as long as someone at Hogwarts is loyal to Dumbledore. And I think that that is true, because even after Dumbledore is gone, there are still those who are loyal to him, and Dumbledore's knowledge still ends up being useful. The other thing is that when when Fawkes flies down to Harry, then Dumbledore remarks later that Harry must have shown true loyalty for Fawkes to come to him. It's just something that I want to like point out for the future going forward, because in this book loyalty seems like a very good thing, and I think loyalty is a good thing. It's just important to know how Dumbledore defines loyalty, and in my opinion, his definition generally includes obedience without question. And I think that that is part of why Dumbledore and Sirius don't get along. And I think that that's why Harry has some problems with Dumbledore later after Dumbledore is gone. It's because he's followed him without question, and then only when you get to that end bit do you realize how kind of messed up that all is. But those are my feelings about Chamber of Secrets. This is a fun book. I haven't made it a secret during this update, during this vlog, that this is not my favorite book. It's my least favorite book, but this is still a really fun story. I think that it's good for laying the groundwork for Ginny that's going to be relevant later on. And like I said, this is the beginning of a lot of essential magic. Where the first book we got a lot of essential characters, this book I think is more about establishing the magical world and its knowledge that you need for the rest of the series. And so I really value it for all of that. Plus, I do love Ginny, so I enjoy that this is kind of her first book where she gets to make appearances, because she's really a character I care about. Yeah, those are my concluding feelings on Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, which of course I loved, just like I love all of these books. If you have thoughts and feelings about any of the things I've said during these updates, please let me know down in the comments below. I want to hear, I want to read, I want to comment back. And keep an eye out in the future for my Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban vlog, which I'm going to be starting like now. And I will be talking lots more. I'm really excited because Remus Lupin is like my second favorite character of the series, I would say. He was my favorite for a lot of years before I decided that Neville was my favorite, so I'm really pumped to get into his first book, because I think Prisoner of Azkaban is an absolutely brilliant part of the series. I think when I ranked them originally, Prisoner of Azkaban is my second favorite. That might change this time, because I don't know how I'm going to feel about Deathly Hallows when I get to it this reread. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!